want you to think about your grocery cart for a second. Specifically, the last time you put something back on the shelf because it cost $2 more. Maybe it was better olive oil or the organic berries instead of the conventional ones. I have done that. Whatever it was, you did the math in your head and decided it wasn't worth it. Now think about the last time you paid a copay without blinking, or refilled a prescription, or scheduled a specialist appointment because something finally hurt enough to make the call. We think about food spending and healthcare spending as two completely separate categories. One is a grocery bill, the other is just life, the cost of being a body that gets older, but they're not separate. They're the same conversation happening on two different timelines, and today we're going to connect them. Welcome back to Rooted and Rising. My name is Lamisa. This is episode 4 of The Real Cost of Wellness, food as medicine versus reactive healthcare. Let's get into it. You've probably heard some version of this stats. 90% of healthcare spending in America goes towards treating chronic disease. It's been repeated by government agencies, wellness brands, and more than a few podcasts. Here's what it actually says. About 90% of healthcare spending goes towards people who have at least one chronic condition, not spending that specifically treats the chronic condition itself. If you have diabetes and you break your arm, the ER visit counts toward the 90%. Even though it has nothing to do with your blood sugar. This is exactly the kind of number the wellness industry and, frankly, plenty of legitimate health institutions round up because the roundup version is punchier. Chronic disease, a lot of it linked to diet, activity, sleep, and stress. It is the single biggest driver of healthcare spending in this country. And unlike your genetics or your age, what you eat is one of the few variables you actually have some control over. There are two kinds of health spendings, and we treat them completely differently. Preventive spending. This is the extra few dollars for better ingredients. The farmer's market instead of the drive-through. The time spent cooking instead of ordering in. It's quiet, it's incremental, and this is the key part. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything. There's no receipt that says this lowers your risk of type 2 diabetes by X%. The payoff is invisible, which makes it easy to relegate. Reactive spending. This is the copay, the medication, the procedure, the specialist. It feels mandatory because by the time you're spending it, it is. Nobody skips the cardiologist appointment to save money the way they skip the good olive oil. Reactive spending has urgency on its side. Preventative spending never gets the urgency until it's too late for it to be preventative anymore. This isn't about fear. It's about noticing that we've been taught to treat food spending as optional and healthcare spending as fixed, when a meaningful amount of that fixed spending is downstream of years of optional decisions. I want to be careful here because just eating healthier is not that expensive. Can be a dismissive thing to say to someone dealing with a food desert, a packed schedule, or a family of picky eaters. Those barriers are real, but it's also true that some of the most nutrient-dense foods available are also some of the cheapest per serving. Dried or canned beans and lentils, oats, frozen vegetables, canned fish, seasonal produce, rice. Meanwhile, a lot of what markets itself as healthy, pre-washed, individually packaged, superfood branded carries a premium that has more to do with convenience and marketing than nutrition. Frozen produce deserves a specific mention here because I think it gets an undeserved reputation. Vegetables and fruits that are frozen at peak ripeness typically retain their nutrient content just as well as fresh, sometimes better, since fresh produce can lose nutrients during transport and storage. Frozen is not the compromise option for a lot of households. It's the smart one. The point isn't that eating well is always cheap and easy. It's that the price tag isn't the whole story. It's worth knowing which parts of healthy you're actually paying a premium for. Food as medicine gets used a lot right now. And I want to define it carefully because it's sometimes used to sell things and sometimes used to make people feel like every meal is a referendum on their future health. Food as medicine doesn't mean kale is going to undo a family history of heart disease. And it doesn't mean one indulgent meal sets you back. My Friday meal. What the research actually supports is more modest and useful. Consistent dietary patterns meaningfully shift risk from the chronic conditions that drive the majority of healthcare spending. 3 patterns have the strongest evidence behind them, and none of them require supplements, a cleanse, or a $200 grocery haul. Fiber intake consistently linked to better cardiometabolic health, more stable blood sugar, and improved gut and cardiovascular outcomes. Protein intake, particularly relevant in midlife, where preserving muscle mass becomes harder as estrogen decline. Minimizing ultra-processed foods as a dietary majority. The research here points to overall dietary patterns, not any single ingredient being toxic. Noticing what is not on this list, eliminating entire food groups, avoiding all sugars, or replacing meals with powders and shakes. Here's the part that's hard to talk about without sounding like a scarce tactic. So let me say it plainly. Managing a chronic condition costs more for longer than preventing one. Medication, specialist visits, complications, these aren't one-time costs. They compound over years, sometimes decades. I'm not saying this to induce guilt about past choices. Genetics, access, stress, and circumstances all play a role in health outcomes. And none of us are fully in control of this equation. This isn't about blaming anyone for the state of their health today. It's about where you point your next dollar. If preventative spending and reactive spending are 2 ends of the same timeline, then every grocery trip is a small vote for which direction the timeline bends. Not a guarantee, a vote. Let's make this useful. Here's a simple framework for building a cart that leans preventative without requiring a nutrition degree or a bigger budget. For most items in your cart, ask whether it's giving you protein, fiber, or both. Beans, lentils, eggs, yogurt, oats, whole grains do double duty. If a category of your cart, snacks in particular, is consistently giving you neither, that's worth a second look, not a full ban. And before checkout, run it through 4 quick questions. Is this mostly one ingredient or a list I can't pronounce? Does this give me protein, fiber, or both? But I still buy this if it costs the same as the more processed alternatives. Am I buying this out of routine or intention? You don't need a perfect cart. You need a cart that's leaning in one direction more often than not. That's the whole shift from reactive to intentional that this series keeps coming back to. Here's your takeaway. Food as medicine isn't about eating perfectly. It's about noticing that every grocery trip is either preventative spending or a missed opportunity for it, and redirecting your dollars accordingly without guilt and without extremism. Next episode is the last one in this series, and it's the one that's going to tie everything together. Episode 5, Building an Intentional Wellness Budget. We're going to take everything we've covered: the wellness tax, the produce aisles, the supplement drawers, and today's grocery cart, and turn it into an actual number you can plan around. If this episode changed how you think about your next grocery trip, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a review. It genuinely helps more women find this show. And come find me at Lamisa Wellness Collective on Facebook, and Lamisa Caradine on LinkedIn, and at Lamisa Caradine on Instagram. I'll see you next time. Stay rooted, keep rising.